"Mom, did you enjoy the lake house?" My son's question should have been simple, the kind of casual remark families make around a dinner table. But the moment those words left Daniel's mouth, something cold settled in my chest. I looked up from my plate and smiled politely, certain I had misheard him. "What lake house?" I asked. For a second, nobody spoke. The room seemed to freeze around me. My granddaughter stopped reaching for a dinner roll. Daniel blinked. And my daughter-in-law Vanessa suddenly became very interested in refilling her glass of iced tea. That was the moment everything began. "My name is Margaret Sullivan. I'm 68 years old, a widow, a mother, and a grandmother." Until that evening, I believed I knew my family. I believed that whatever distance had grown between us over the years was simply part of life. Children get busy. Grandchildren grow up. People move in different directions. That was what I told myself every time another holiday passed with only a short phone call. That was what I told myself whenever a family gathering seemed to happen without me. But sitting at that Memorial Day dinner in Columbus, Ohio, staring at my son's confused face, I felt the first crack appear in a story I thought I understood. Earlier that evening, everything had seemed perfectly normal. Daniel had invited me over for a family barbecue. The backyard smelled like grilled burgers and fresh-cut grass. American flags fluttered from several neighboring porches. Children laughed somewhere down the block. It was the kind of warm late spring evening that makes you grateful winter is finally gone. I had brought my homemade apple pie, the same recipe my husband loved before he passed away 6 years ago. We ate dinner on the patio while Daniel shared photographs from a recent vacation. The images appeared one after another on a large tablet screen. Beaches, sunsets, boat rides, family smiles. I watched quietly, happy simply to be included for once. Then a photograph appeared that caught my attention. Behind Daniel and the children stood a beautiful house overlooking a lake. It was larger than any vacation rental I had ever seen. The porch stretched across the entire front of the property. Adirondack chairs lined the deck. The water behind it reflected the evening sun like polished glass. There was something strangely familiar about the place, though I couldn't explain why. "That was your favorite spot, wasn't it, Mom?" Daniel said with a laugh. "You always loved sitting on the dock." My smile faded. "Daniel," I said carefully, "I've never been there." The expression on his face changed instantly. Confusion, then concern. Across the table, Vanessa looked away. It was a small movement. Most people would have missed it. But when you've spent nearly 7 decades watching people, you learn to notice the little things. The silences, the glances, the moments when someone avoids your eyes. "Of course you have," Daniel replied. "That's the lake house." I looked from him to Vanessa and back again. Nobody seemed willing to explain. The laughter from a neighboring yard drifted across the fence. A breeze moved through the trees. Everything around us felt normal except for the growing feeling that I had just stumbled onto a secret. And for the first time in years, I decided I was going to find out exactly what had been hidden from me. That night, I could not stop thinking about the look on Vanessa's face. It was not shock. It was not confusion. It was recognition. The moment Daniel mentioned the lake house, she had reacted as though a door had suddenly opened in a room she hoped would stay locked forever. I drove home just after sunset, taking the familiar 20-minute route to my small house on the outskirts of Columbus. The streets were quiet. The holiday traffic had faded. Porch lights glowed softly in neighborhoods I had driven through for years. Normally, I enjoyed those drives. They gave me time to think. But that evening, my thoughts kept circling the same question. Why would my son believe I had spent time at a lake house I had never seen? Inside my house, everything felt exactly as it always had. The framed photographs on the hallway wall. The grandfather clock in the living room. The worn recliner where my late husband used to watch baseball games. 6 years had passed since Richard died, yet sometimes I still expected to hear his footsteps crossing the kitchen floor. Grief changes shape over time. It becomes quieter, less sharp, but it never completely leaves. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table long after midnight. The silence around me felt heavier than usual. As I stared out the window into the darkness, memories began surfacing. Not dramatic memories. Small ones. The kind people dismiss because they seem insignificant on their own. 2 years ago, Daniel canceled Thanksgiving dinner 3 days before the holiday. Vanessa said the children had come down with a stomach bug. The following Christmas, they spent the holiday at a ski resort with her relatives. Last summer, They skipped our annual 4th of July cookout because of what Vanessa described as a scheduling conflict. There was always a reason. Always an explanation that sounded reasonable enough to accept. I never complained. I never wanted to become one of those mothers who demanded attention from grown children. I told myself they were busy building their lives. I told myself families change. Yet as I sat there replaying those years, another thought slowly emerged. Every absence had one thing in common. Vanessa had always been the one delivering the explanation. Around 8 o'clock the next morning, I found myself opening Facebook. I rarely spent much time on social media, but something inside me urged me to look. Daniel posted occasionally, mostly pictures of the children, birthday parties, soccer games, school concerts, normal family moments. I began scrolling backward through months of photographs, then years. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Smiling faces, vacations, holiday gatherings. But after a while, patterns began appearing. There were photographs from beach trips I had never heard about, weekend getaways, family reunions, celebrations. The more I looked, the more I noticed a strange detail. In picture after picture, nearly everyone seemed to be there. Cousins, in-laws, family friends, even distant relatives. Everyone except me. I clicked through an album posted almost 18 months earlier. The title read Family Weekend Escape. My stomach tightened. Several photos showed Daniel standing on a wooden dock beside a lake. The same lake from the picture I had seen the night before. The same house. The same porch. The same Adirondack chairs facing the water. In one image, my granddaughter Emma sat on the dock holding a fishing rod. In another, the entire family gathered around a fire pit beneath string lights. They looked happy, comfortable, familiar with the place, as though they had visited many times before. I leaned closer to the screen. Then I noticed something that made my pulse quicken. One of the captions read, "Another wonderful weekend at Grandma's favorite place." I stared at those words for a long time, because I had never been there. Not once. For the next several days, I told no one what I had found. Not Daniel. Not my sister Carol. Not even my closest friend, Nancy, who had listened patiently through every challenge of the past 20 years. Some truths need time before they can be spoken aloud. Once words leave your mouth, there is no putting them back. I wanted facts before I allowed myself to form conclusions. Still, the photographs stayed with me. Every morning, I found myself returning to them. The same smiling faces, the same lake, the same mysterious house that apparently belonged in a version of my life I had never lived. What troubled me most was not the possibility that I had been excluded. It was the certainty that everyone seemed to believe I had been included. Those were two very different things. On Saturday afternoon, Daniel called. His voice sounded cheerful, normal. He asked about my garden. He told me Emma had won an award at school. Not once did he mention our strange conversation from Memorial Day. I almost brought it up myself. Almost. But something stopped me. Instead, I listened carefully. Sometimes people reveal more when they believe everything is fine. The following Sunday, I attended Emma's 10th birthday party. Vanessa had rented a community room at a local recreation center. Balloons decorated the walls. Children ran between tables carrying slices of cake and paper cups filled with fruit punch. The room echoed with laughter and excited voices. I spent most of the afternoon helping younger children with party games and chatting with relatives I had not seen in months. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Yet I could not shake the feeling that I was standing inside a story where everyone knew a chapter one had never read. Near the end of the party, I found myself sitting beside Emma while she opened gifts. She was a bright child with her father's smile and a habit of speaking every thought that entered her mind. One of the reasons I adored her was that children rarely understand how to hide the truth. She carefully examined a new art set before looking up at me. "Grandma, are you coming this summer?" she asked. I smiled. "Coming where, sweetheart?" "To the lake." She said it so casually that for a moment I thought I had imagined it. "What lake?" I asked gently. Emma looked surprised. "The lake house. Dad said we might all go in July." My heart began to beat a little faster. I kept my voice calm. "Have you been there before?" She laughed. "Lots of times." Then she lowered her voice as though sharing a secret. "It is my favorite place in the whole world." Before I could ask another question, Vanessa appeared beside us. The timing was almost perfect. "Emma, honey, your friends are waiting for you." My granddaughter jumped up and ran across the room. Vanessa remained standing there for a second longer than necessary. Her smile never reached her eyes. "Children have such active imaginations," she said lightly. Then she walked away. I watched her cross the room and join Daniel near the refreshment table. Neither of them looked in my direction. That brief conversation changed everything. Until then, I had considered the possibility that there was some innocent explanation. A misunderstanding. A mix-up. But Emma had spoken with the confidence of someone describing a place she knew well. More importantly, she had spoken as though my presence there was expected, as though I belonged in those memories. Driving home that evening, I replayed every word. The summer sun hung low over the Ohio countryside. Long shadows stretched across the fields beside the highway. For the first time, another possibility entered my mind. What if the mystery was not about a vacation property at all? What if someone had spent years creating a version of reality for my family that existed only on paper? And if that was true, I needed to know why. The following morning, I woke before the sun, as I often did, with the quiet streets of my neighborhood still wrapped in the blue-gray hush of dawn. My kitchen smelled faintly of brewed coffee from the night before. I set my mug down carefully and pulled out a stack of papers I had collected over the past week. Bills, receipts, legal documents, property records, anything that might help me understand the strange pattern I had begun to notice. The documents were ordinary at first glance, yet each contained tiny anomalies, small discrepancies that suggested someone had been carefully managing information to create a false narrative. I sorted through everything methodically, taking notes, highlighting dates and names, comparing addresses, cross-checking signatures. Hours passed with only the ticking of the wall clock to mark time. By mid-morning, a clearer picture began to form. The lake house had indeed been purchased, and it had been intended for my use. The deeds had been correctly filed in my name. Monthly maintenance payments had been set up, but the bank records showed they had been redirected. The realization was almost surreal. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a careful, deliberate misdirection. I took a deep breath and looked out the kitchen window at the spring morning. Birds flitted from branch to branch, entirely unaware of the human drama unfolding a few blocks away. I could feel my own pulse steadying, a quiet determination settling over me. I would need more than assumptions to address this, more than memories and suspicions. Facts were what mattered. I decided to reach out to someone who might provide insight, a former assistant of Daniel who had handled some of his family paperwork in previous years. She agreed to meet me at a small cafe in town. When I arrived, the familiar smell of roasted coffee beans and warm pastries filled the air. I explained as clearly as possible what I had observed, careful to avoid assumptions, recounting only what the documents and photographs showed. Her eyes widened as she listened. "I thought you knew," she said quietly. "I was told not to mention anything, that it was being handled." She hesitated, glancing around the cafe, then continued. "All the signatures went through, but the transfers were rerouted. Vanessa managed the accounts." I felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. Relief, because now there was confirmation. Disbelief, because the extent of the concealment had been far greater than I could have imagined. I asked about the children. Did Daniel know any of this? She shook her head. He had no idea. The truth was carefully hidden from him as well. I left the cafe with my mind racing and my heart calm in a way it had not been in years. The quiet streets greeted me once more as I walked back to my car. Sunlight now warmed the sidewalks and glinted off parked cars. The world carried on as it always had, oblivious to the unraveling of the careful deception within my own family. I knew that once Daniel discovered the facts, nothing would be the same, but for now, I could prepare. Step by step, document by document, I would set the record straight and uncover the full truth behind the summer holidays I had never truly experienced. Over the next few days, I continued gathering evidence in silence. Each morning, I reviewed photographs, cross-referenced documents, and made careful notes about discrepancies in bank statements and property transfers. I paid particular attention to the timing of events. Every vacation, every holiday outing, every family celebration I had been excluded from now appeared connected. The more I analyzed the documents, the clearer it became that Vanessa had orchestrated the redirection of both funds and property without Daniel knowing. On Wednesday morning, I visited the county records office to examine official documents regarding the lake house. The clerk was helpful and polite, providing certified copies of deeds and transfer paperwork. I carefully compared these against what I had gathered from bank statements and online records. The confirmation was undeniable. The property had initially been purchased in my name following my late husband's instructions, yet all subsequent actions had been manipulated so that I never held actual control. Each page I examined seemed to reinforce the pattern of deception. Once home, I spread the documents across my dining table, a stack of paper that told a story of years of careful planning and concealment. I made a detailed timeline, noting every transaction, every date when correspondence had been rerouted, and every instance where Vanessa had presented herself as the intermediary for communications that should have reached me directly. I paused occasionally, taking sips of tea, staring out the window as the morning sunlight shifted across my living room. The calm quiet of my house stood in stark contrast to the intensity of what I had uncovered. I realized that the deliberate manipulation had affected not just property, but family dynamics. The children, the extended relatives, and even Daniel had unknowingly been drawn into a version of reality designed to make it seem as though I had always been part of every event when in fact I had been absent. The thought was unsettling, yet my resolve grew stronger. I could no longer allow these actions to continue without consequence. On Thursday, I scheduled a meeting with a local estate attorney who had previously handled my late husband's affairs. I prepared all documentation carefully, labeling each folder and providing a written summary of my findings. When I arrived at the office, the attorney greeted me warmly and asked me to explain the situation. I laid out everything I had discovered, showing the photographs, bank records, and deed transfers. The attorney listened quietly, occasionally nodding, and asked clarifying questions. By the end of the session, he confirmed that legal avenues existed to correct the record and restore control over the property and funds that had been diverted. Leaving the office, I felt a sense of cautious anticipation. I was armed with evidence, clarity, and a plan. The house felt unusually bright as I drove back, sunlight reflecting off the sidewalks and the cars parked along the street. I thought about Daniel, about how he would react when confronted with the truth, and about the changes that would inevitably follow within our family. The realization that the holidays and family gatherings had been manipulated no longer brought confusion or doubt, only a quiet determination to see that fairness and transparency were restored. In the kitchen that evening, I organized the documents for final review, noting any points that required additional verification. Each checkmark on my list was a small victory, a step closer to reclaiming not only the property, but also the trust and respect that had been withheld from me for so many years. I poured a cup of chamomile tea, letting the steam rise slowly as I sat back and reflected on the progress. For the first time in years, I felt in control. The path ahead was clear, and I would follow it patiently, methodically, until every detail had been addressed and the truth fully acknowledged. The following week brought the final pieces of the puzzle. By then, my attorney had begun reviewing every document in detail, and I continued gathering information wherever I could find it. What surprised me most was how easily the truth revealed itself once I stopped accepting appearances. For years, I had assumed distance in my family came from busy schedules and changing priorities. Now I could see that many of those distances had been carefully maintained. One afternoon, my attorney called and asked me to come by his office. His tone was calm, but there was something different in his voice. When I arrived, he slid a folder across the desk. Inside were records connected to the monthly payments originally established for my benefit. The amounts varied slightly over the years, but together they represented a substantial sum. Money that should have helped with home repairs, medical expenses, and everyday peace of mind. Money I had never received. I sat quietly as he explained the findings. The payments had been redirected through accounts managed by Vanessa. Every transfer created another layer between the original source and the final destination. It was complicated enough that nobody would notice unless they specifically searched for it. Daniel had apparently trusted her to manage family administrative matters. That trust had allowed everything else to happen. I drove home in silence, trying to process the scale of what had been hidden. The money mattered, of course, but what hurt more was the realization that entire years of my life had been shaped by decisions made without my knowledge. I thought about the roof repairs I postponed, the vacations I never took, the prescriptions I carefully budgeted, all while resources intended for me existed somewhere beyond my reach. 2 days later, another unexpected piece of information arrived. The former assistant I had spoken with called again. She sounded nervous. She told me she had located several archived emails from years earlier. Emails discussing the property, maintenance schedules, and family visits. According to those messages, Daniel frequently asked whether I was enjoying the house. Each time, someone responded on my behalf. Short messages, friendly updates, casual comments about weekends by the lake. The replies made it appear that I was using the property regularly. I closed my eyes as she described them. Someone had not only redirected assets. Someone had created an entire fictional version of my life. A version everyone else believed. That evening, I sat alone on my back porch watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange and gold above the trees. Neighbors walked their dogs. A lawn mower hummed in the distance. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary people. Yet my world felt very different from the one I had inhabited only a month earlier. For the first time, I stopped wondering whether Daniel had participated in any of it. The evidence pointed somewhere else entirely. He had been deceived too. Perhaps not in the same way. Perhaps not with the same consequences. But deceived nonetheless. That realization changed my approach completely. This was no longer about confronting an enemy. It was about revealing a truth. Quietly, clearly, irrefutably. I returned inside and organized every document into chronological order. Property records, financial statements, email copies, written notes. Each folder represented another piece of the story. By midnight, the dining table looked more like an investigator's workspace than a family home. I stood there studying the evidence. Years of hidden decisions arranged neatly before me. For the first time, I could finally see the full shape of what had happened. And I knew something else as well. Very soon, Daniel was going to see it too. The next morning, I decided it was time to share my findings with Daniel. I invited him over to my house under the pretense of going through old family photographs together. He arrived mid-morning, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing a light jacket for the cool spring air. Emma ran ahead to greet him, and we settled at the dining table, the same table where I had spent hours sorting through evidence. I began by showing him photographs from the past 2 years, pointing out trips and outings that had somehow never included me. He frowned, confused, asking why I was raising these now. I kept my voice calm and even, describing only what I had observed, the facts as they appeared. Then I brought out the documents, property deeds, bank statements, and email records that demonstrated the redirection of funds and the concealment of the lake house. Daniel leaned back in his chair, taking in the information slowly, his brow furrowed. I watched him carefully, noting how his expression shifted from confusion to dawning realization. He picked up a document and traced a finger along the transfer records, finally meeting my eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "I had no idea." I nodded, acknowledging the truth of his words. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was a quiet space of shared understanding. I continued to explain, step by step, how each account and transaction had been rerouted, how each vacation had been portrayed as if I had been present when I had not. Daniel listened intently, occasionally murmuring questions, which I answered plainly, without emotion beyond a firm resolve. It was important that he understood, not felt guilt or anger, but saw the reality clearly. After nearly 2 hours of reviewing the evidence, Daniel sat back, rubbing his temples. "This is incredible," he murmured. "I cannot believe this has been happening right under my nose." I remained composed. "The facts are what they are. Now you." "No." He nodded. The weight of years of misinformation and carefully constructed narratives seemed to lift slightly as he processed everything. I could sense that our relationship, strained though it had become through misunderstandings and absences, was beginning to rebuild on this new foundation of truth. We spent the next hour planning how to address the situation with the rest of the family. No dramatics, no accusations. Just clarity and accountability. Daniel agreed to review all further records with me and to confirm the steps required to restore the property and financial assets to their proper status. By the time he left, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the porch. The breeze carried the fresh scent of newly cut grass. I watched him walk to his car, feeling a sense of calm determination. For the first time in years, I felt that I had taken control of the story that had unfolded around me. The path ahead was clear, and I would follow it carefully, ensuring that truth and fairness prevailed in every detail. restoring not only what was mine, but also trust and integrity within the family. 2 weeks later, everything came to a head during a family gathering that Daniel organized at his home. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary Sunday dinner. The children played in the backyard. The smell of grilled chicken drifted through the open patio door. Relatives chatted about work, school, and summer plans. Yet beneath the familiar routine, there was a quiet sense of anticipation. Daniel and I had spent days preparing for this moment. Not for confrontation, but for clarity. Shortly after dessert was served, Daniel stood and thanked everyone for coming. His voice was steady, but I could hear the seriousness underneath. Conversations gradually faded. Chairs shifted. Curious eyes turned toward him. Vanessa smiled politely from across the table, apparently unaware of what was about to happen. Daniel began by talking about family trust. He spoke about honesty, responsibility, and the importance of transparency. Several relatives exchanged confused glances. Then he placed a folder on the table. My folder. The same one that contained years of records, transfers, emails, and property documents. The room grew noticeably quieter. Daniel carefully walked everyone through the timeline. He showed the original property records. He explained how the lake house had been purchased for my benefit after my husband's passing. He described the monthly financial support that had been established for me. Then he presented the transfer records and correspondence. No accusations. No raised voices. Just facts. One document after another. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, watching reactions unfold. At first, most people looked confused. Then surprise began appearing on their faces. Some relatives leaned forward to examine the paperwork more closely. Others simply stared. The silence became heavier with every page Daniel revealed. Vanessa's expression changed gradually. The confident smile disappeared. Her posture stiffened. She asked a few questions, but the answers were already sitting in front of everyone. The records spoke for themselves. What struck me most was not anyone's reaction. It was the realization that the truth required very little explanation. Once the facts were visible, years of misunderstandings suddenly made sense. Missed holidays, strange excuses, family events that somehow happened without me. The picture was finally complete. Emma, too young to fully understand the details, sat quietly beside her cousin. She looked back and forth between the adults, sensing the importance of the moment. Daniel remained calm throughout the discussion. I was proud of him for that. There was no anger in his voice, only disappointment and determination. When he finished presenting the evidence, nobody spoke for several seconds. The room felt completely still. Outside, wind moved gently through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed. Ordinary sounds continuing beyond an extraordinary moment. Finally, one of our relatives quietly asked the question everyone seemed to be thinking. How could something like this continue for so many years without anyone noticing? No one had an answer. Perhaps because trust often prevents people from looking too closely. Perhaps because family members naturally assume the best about one another. Whatever the reason, the illusion could not survive once the evidence was placed in the open. As the evening drew to a close, conversations became subdued and thoughtful. People lingered longer than usual before leaving. The atmosphere felt different now. Not broken, not hostile, simply changed. For the first time in years, everything hidden had been brought into the light. And as I watched the last guests prepare to leave, I realized that the most important conversation of all had not happened yet. The following weekend, I decided it was time to create a tangible memory to mark the resolution of the long-hidden truth. I arranged a family photography session at the lake house, the very property that had been at the center of so many years of miscommunication and secrecy. The morning air was crisp and carried the scent of pine from the surrounding woods. Daniel, Emma, and the younger children arrived first, laughter echoing across the wooden dock as they explored the water's edge. I stood quietly, observing the familiar smiles and energy, knowing that this was the moment to re-establish our presence within the memories that had been denied. I carried a vintage Polaroid camera that had belonged to my late husband, a small nod to continuity and family tradition. As each person posed naturally, I captured the interactions. Daniel adjusting his daughter's sun hat, Emma holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, my granddaughter Thomas skipping across the planks with uncontainable excitement. Vanessa was notably absent, not by design, but by her own choice. perhaps sensing that her role in the family story had been diminished by the clarity we had achieved. I guided Daniel to stand beside me for a few portraits, the sunlight reflecting on the lake creating a warm, golden glow across the scene. I instructed the children to cluster naturally around us, capturing the spontaneous moments between poses. The camera clicked repeatedly, each instant frozen with laughter and gentle movements. As I reviewed the Polaroids, I felt a sense of completeness that I had not experienced in years. Each image represented more than just a photograph. It was proof of presence, of inclusion, and of reclaiming our rightful place within the family narrative. After the session, we sat on the deck with lemonade, sharing stories about past summers and planning upcoming trips that I would fully participate in. Emma beamed as she recounted her favorite memories, now including me. Daniel shared insights about work and school with a renewed openness, seeking my opinion and guidance as he had in years past before so many details had been obscured. I realized that the lake house was more than just a property. It symbolized transparency, trust, and the re-establishment of familial bonds that had been strained but were not broken. As the sun set, painting the lake in shades of pink and amber, I placed the last Polaroid into an album I had been preparing for months. It was the photograph of all of us together, genuinely present, smiling without pretense, a family that had reclaimed its integrity. Standing back and observing the scene, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The hidden chapters were finally visible, but now they were replaced with new memories, ones that I was fully part of. This day was ours, fully ours, and the photographs we created were more than evidence. They were celebrations of truth, inclusion, and a family finally aligned.